Well, we're in part 4 of this series, Unshakable, and we're on a journey together to discover how do we have unwavering faith as we live in uncertain times. And we all get uncertainties everywhere. There's global uncertainty, there's uncertainty here in the United States, and there's personal uncertainty in all of our lives. And we're journeying through the story of Daniel. It's actually a book in the Old Testament named Daniel. And today we're going to actually look at two very specific storylines that will kind of have a central theme. It's a vision or a dream. Now, one of the visions is literally connected to a dream. The other vision is connected to a drunken party, but we'll get to that in a few moments. You can read both of these storylines in Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5. And these visions are connected to two different kings. King Nebuchadnezzar, who we're really familiar with. Why? Because King Nebuchadnezzar has been the king from Daniel 1 to chapter 3 and into chapter 4. But there's a time gap between chapter 4 and chapter 5. In fact, there was several Babylonian kings between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Those kings were only kings a short period of time because they died or were killed. And now Belshazzar, the author calls him king. Now, what we know from history is Belshazzar wasn't really king. His dad was king. Belshazzar was the co-regent king, meaning his dad was off fighting wars, being kingly, and Belshazzar was responsible in the capital city to hold everything together. He was co-regent. The second insight that's really important is in Daniel chapter 5, the author says that Belshazzar's dad is Nebuchadnezzar. Well, technically, he wasn't dad, he wasn't father, but the ancient Hebrew writer would use that word father as simply meaning an ancestor or grandfather. And so through the family line, they were connected together. But again, Belshazzar's immediate father was king out fighting war, and Belshazzar, again, co-regent. Now, these stories are so similar because they have to do with just not a vision, a dream, but they have to do with the subject matter of pride. Now, where those two storylines are connected, the ending part of the stories are vastly different. So let's start into the first story connected to King Nebuchadnezzar and the dream, the vision that he has. What's fascinating about chapter 4 of Daniel is that this entire chapter is being shared by Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king. And this is how it starts. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders. Let's pause. What Nebuchadnezzar is saying is, I want to share with you my story. I'm going to tell you what has happened in my life. You got to pause because there's a story of epic proportions that you got to hear. So Nebuchadnezzar, again, a pagan king, is sharing his story. He goes, I want to tell you about the miraculous signs and the wonders and that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders, his kingdoms is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. What an opening. King Nebuchadnezzar, he is on fire, and he wants everyone to know his story about what God has done in him and through him. And so he starts to tell the story. He's like, hey, one day I had a dream. I had a vision. He actually says he was laying in bed. And so he wants to get this dream interpreted. So he calls in all of his wise men and say, hey, I got this dream. You got to hear it. And as he tells them, none of them could interpret it. None of them could understand it. So finally he goes, where's Daniel? And Daniel makes his way back in. Same Daniel that interpreted the dream about the big statue representing the different empires. We looked at that in part 2. So Daniel comes in and the king goes, hey, Daniel, okay, here's my dream. I was laying in bed and I see this vision. I see this dream and I'm laying there and I was content and prosperous. And Nebuchadnezzar is painting this picture of my life was good. Everything I wanted, I had. I'm just laying there, just soaking up all the things that I have. Life's good. And he goes, and then in this dream, in this vision, there was a gigantic tree, and that tree grew bigger, and it grew bigger. So it touched the clouds. And Daniel, in that tree was fruit. I mean, it's covered with fruit. I mean, enough food to feed everyone. I mean, there's so much food in this tree. And oh, by the way, Daniel, not just food in the tree, fruit in the tree. No. There were birds in the tree. I mean, birds covered the tree. And then there's wild animals, beasts underneath this gigantic tree. And then Daniel, all of a sudden, this angelic being from heaven comes out and starts talking to me. And this angelic being from heaven, this messenger says, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from underneath it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them the lowest of people. Now you think about this moment. As Nebuchadnezzar, again, he was the king of Babylon. He was the world leader, the world power broker, the world influencer. It was Nebuchadnezzar. And then all of a sudden, as he tells this dream, he ends by saying, the Most High is sovereign over all. You see the theme throughout Daniel. It comes back to over and over again. God making it known to world leaders and world powers and to individuals that he is God, that he is sovereign, that he is over all and through all, and everything that happens, God has allowed. That God is working in the smallest of ways and the biggest of ways. Well, we're told in Daniel 4 that when King Nebuchadnezzar gets done sharing this vision with Daniel, that Daniel was perplexed. Now, the Aramaic word, and it was Aramaic, literally means that Daniel was stupefied, which is just an incredible word, right? Stupefied. He was stupefied, and we're told that he was stupefied in chapter 4. Again, the author tells us for an hour. Now, it wasn't a literal hour. The author was just trying to paint a picture that he was perplexed. He was stupefied for a long time. Now, we have to ask the question, well, why was he stupefied? Was it because he didn't know what the dream was about? I don't think so at all, because all of a sudden he tells the king what the dream's about. And Daniel's been through this before, and Daniel just knows that God's going to reveal to him the meaning of the dream. No. Daniel was perplexed. He was stupefied because he realizes the weightiness of what he's going to have to say to the king. Daniel was stupefied. He was perplexed because he knows what God is saying through him, Daniel, to King Nebuchadnezzar was weighty, was going to be difficult, was going to be tension-filled. And all of a sudden, you can feel Daniel just take a deep breath. He says, oh king, you are that tree. You're the tree, king. You think you're so mighty. You think you're so grand. You think that you're the one feeding all the people and all the kingdom is yours. You are that tree. But king, you got to realize that you're going to go mad. You're going to go insane. For 7 years, you're going to live as a beast with the beasts. O king, what's coming your way is going to be the most difficult thing you've ever faced in your life. And Daniel goes, the command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when, king, you better listen to this, when you acknowledge that heaven rules. And therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. You better listen, king. You better lean in, king. King, I'm telling you what's coming your way. So you better remember my words. Here's my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. What's Daniel's advice? Hey, king, you better humble yourself. You better humble yourself to God, and you better humble yourself to the people around you. You see, when you humble yourself to God, you will humble yourself to, everyone around you. But it starts with, humility to God, a sovereign God, all-powerful God, all-knowing God, and everywhere God. And as you humble yourself to God, you will humble yourself to every single person connected to you. And Daniel goes, King, that's the dream. You better listen to my advice. Now, we're told that about a year went by. The king went back to just doing kingly things. And one day he did something that he had done probably countless times before. He was standing on top, the very peak of his palace, looking over his entire mighty kingdom, looking at all the stuff that was his, how good he is, and how good and mighty he is, and how prosperous he is. I mean, he's looking at it all. And again, it's something that he had probably done countless times, maybe even daily. We don't know for sure, but he's on there. And Nebuchadnezzar says to himself, is not this the great Babylon I have built as a royal residence? By my is a key word, my mighty power, and for the glory of my is another key word, my majesty. He's like, hey, look at me. Look at everything I have done. And we're told that immediately he was struck insane, just like God had said to him in that vision. And for 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar lived as an insane man, as a madman, as a beast, like the other beast of the wilderness. For 7 years, a long time. And after 7 years, just like God said, we're told at the end of that time, Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king, telling the story. He goes, at the end of 7 years, King Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. You think about this moment, this pagan king who's finally recognizing the God of the universe, the sovereign, the one true God. And he goes, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right. And all his ways, everything he does are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Those who walk in pride, he's able to humble. What a story. What a story. I mean, thousands of years ago for him to tell, everyone in Babylon. And what a story for you and I in this moment to hear that God is looking for us to be humble, to recognize that pride is lurking in the shadows, and we need to lower ourselves. That brings to an end chapter 4. Like I mentioned, there's a period of time between chapter 4 and chapter 5, about 25, 30 years right in there. And all of a sudden, chapter 5 opens up, and we're introduced to, this king, Belshazzar. Remember, he's co-regent. His dad's actually the king, but he's acting like king in the the capital. And what we know is it's 539 BC. That's a really important date of history. And the why we'll get there. And on this day, Belshazzar throws this massive party in the great banquet hall. He calls in 1,000 of his nobles and his wives and his concubines. I mean, this is a drunken feast, a drunken party. They start pouring the wine, and we're told that he gets out the gold goblets that Nebuchadnezzar had taken in chapter 1 when he comes through Judah and he lays siege to Jerusalem and he enslaves Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he takes some of the sacred items from the temple, right? That's the very beginning of Daniel. Guess what? Belshazzar gets out these goblets and he starts to pour wine into these goblets. And they start to drink excessively. And we're told that as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and the gods of silver and the gods of bronze and iron and wood and stone. So he's using sacred objects that were supposed to be in the temple of God, God's resting place, God's house. And now they're using them to worship their pagan gods. And as they drink a ton of wine, we're told that suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. And I think practically, again, this is not in the text, but right, there had to be a moment where he's like, how drunk am I? And is this real or is it not? And the more he focused on this hand writing these words on the wall, he came to quickly realize, no. This is real. This is actually happening. And so King Belshazzar does what kings do, what Babylonian kings do. He called in all of his wise men, the astrologers, the sorcerers, the magicians. He called them all in. He's like, hey, what are these words and what do they mean? We're told that none of the wise men knew what the words were and what they meant. I mean, they didn't know. As this was happening, there's a great commotion in this banquet hall. And I love this just very human moment. All of a sudden, the queen hears this. Remember, the queen is Belshazzar's mom. Why? Because, again, Belshazzar is co-regent. He's just the son acting like king. So mom steps in. Mom, who was not invited to the party. Mom, who was not, she didn't get the invitation. Why? Because son did not want her in that type of party. But she hears a commotion. She walks in. She finds out what's going on. And she says to Belshazzar, hey, son, you're forgetting one. Remember your grandfather? He had a relationship with a guy named Daniel, who was over all the wise men. And Daniel, he was different than the other wise men. He was different than the other magicians. He was different than the other sorcerers. Hey, Daniel, you should call him. You should have him come in. We're told in verse 11 that the queen goes, there's a man in your kingdom who has a spirit of the holy gods in him. Again, different than our gods. In the time of your father, who is found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. And your father, Grandpa, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Hey, Daniel, you got to go get Daniel. He'll be able to tell you. So Belshazzar calls and go gets Daniel. And Daniel walks into this great banquet hall. And Belshazzar goes, hey, can you tell me what these words mean? Can you tell me what this vision is about? And if you do, Daniel, there's a handsome reward that I want to give you, and I'm going to promote you again. So Daniel, what say you? Daniel looks at the king and he goes, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. And you can feel that Belshazzar is now leaning in. He's like, okay, Daniel knows. The rest of the wise men done, but he knows, and he waits in anticipation. What do these words mean? But before Daniel gets there, Daniel has something to say. Now, Daniel at this point isn't a teenage boy. He's probably 80, 81 years old. Daniel has lived a long life. The vast majority of his life as a slave in Babylon, right? Not in his homeland. He was taken away from that. He was enslaved as a teenage boy, but now he's 80, 81 years old. He understands what it means to have unwavering faith, living in uncertainty. And Daniel just seizes this moment. He looks at the king. He goes, Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to be put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. Hey, king, know this. The great king Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest of all the Babylonian kings. He's like, everything he had is because of God, the sovereign God, the one true God, the God over all, gave it to him. And then Daniel starts to tell this story, the story we just looked at in chapter 4. The story that Belshazzar would have heard, would have known about. Maybe he had forgotten. But Daniel wants to make sure that he remembers. He goes, but when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from the people and given the mind of an animal, like a beast. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and sets them over anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this. Instead, you set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You have promoted yourself. You have placed yourself above all. And then Daniel looks at him and says, you want to know what these words are? Many, many tekel parson. Hey, king, you got to realize that God has numbered the days of your reign, and he's brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the scales and found wanting. God is holding you accountable to your pride, to your arrogance. Parson, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And that night, what we're told is Belshazzar was killed. And all of a sudden, the Medo-Persian Empire comes marching in, and Babylon falls. You see, we think about these two stories, chapter 4 and chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Their central connecting point is pride. Now, the end of the story, right, are completely different. Nebuchadnezzar humbles himself. And we have this amazing chapter 4 of him giving honor and worship to God. And Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself, and his life ends. You see, pride is such a destructive force in all of our lives. C.S. Lewis wrote these words in Mere Christianity. He goes, pride is a spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. And you think about those three elements, love, pride, right? It destroys relationships. Marriage relationship, parenting relationship, church relationships, work relationships, friendship relationship, right? Pride decimates relationships, right? Because pride tears away love. It dismantles love. He goes, contentment, right? Pride is about us wanting to hold on to our stuff, our money, our wealth, our things, our right? We want to hold on to it all. And guess what? When we want to hold on to it all, we become more and more and more and more discontent with what we have. Because you can never satisfy pride. And he goes, and just common sense. Because pride blinds us. The wisdom writer wrote these famous words. He goes, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before the fall. I mean, pride was the very first sin. Go back to Genesis, Adam and Eve in the garden with the serpent whispering. Pride's the first sin. It's like, hey, you can become like God. You can have the wisdom of God. You can have the authority of God. You don't need God. You can be God. That's pride. And pride's the last sin right before it destroys our life. So many times the question that gets attached to pride is this simple question: Do I have pride within me? And maybe you're just thinking about that right now. And you're like, okay, yeah, pride is destructive. Do I have it? Do I have pride in me? And let me just answer it for you. The answer is yes. We all have it within us. The real question that we should focus on personally is this question: how is pride manifesting itself within me? Where is pride rearing its head? What does pride look like within me? Because once we can answer that question, then we can identify it and we can do something about it. So, how does pride manifest itself within us? Now, this is going to be a quick list. I want you to, there's going to be one, maybe two, maybe more than that. But at least one I want you just to write down, to snap a picture of, just capture it, because there's going to be one on this list. I'm just going to tell you, you're going to be like, that's me. And as soon as you do, recognize it, bring it out into the light, right? When we bring our sin, pride into the light, then there's healing. Now God can do something within it. Now we can focus on it and say, how do I overcome that? So there's going to be at least one, probably more. I know more for me, but at least one. And when you hear that one, again, write it down, take a picture, capture it, and don't lose sight of it. Why? Because pride is lurking in all of us in the shadows, and it's wreaking havoc. So here's some of the ways pride manifests itself. Refusing to ask for help. I put that one first because this is me. This is me. I refuse to ask help. I have all the great excuses of why. I have all, and they are spiritual, and they make me feel good, and they're great just in conversation. I mean, I can nail all the reasons why I don't ask for help, but at the end of the day, it's pride. And just a few weeks ago, someone had offered to help move some rock, and I allowed my pride to well up, and I made up excuses, and they were really good talking points. I mean, I communicate for a living. And then all of a sudden, I had a late meeting on a Sunday. I drove home. I got home about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, when I drove in the driveway, this couple was there with their tractor helping my wife move these rocks. And I just called myself out. I'm just like, thank you. I didn't ask, but thank you. And I need to. And I just owned it. Because at the end of the day, it was my own pride that chose not to ask for help when they offered to help. Is that how pride's manifesting itself within you? Maybe it looks like this: dismissing the wisdom of others. Do you have some of the same people giving you the same wisdom, the same insight, the same guidance, and you just refuse to listen to anyone around you because you think you know what's best? You say things like, well, no one knows me like me. Here's the thing: pride will fool ourselves. Pride will convince us that we are the smartest person and no one else gets it, no one else understands, no one else does. And guess what? We will dismiss all the collective wisdom around us, and guess where that will lead us? Into destruction. Do you have people whispering the same truth within you and you are ignoring them, you're shoving them away? It's pride. And you should lower your pride, call it out, and start listening to the people around you. Maybe pride looks like this: thinking you're better than others. Do you look down on people in different social economic classes, and you're just like, yeah, if they would only, and you just have that feeling? You go shopping and you just look down on people. Do you look down on people because of their education? They're like, well, they don't have a master's, they don't have a doctorate, they didn't go to this college. Like, I'm just more educated than everyone else. I'm just smarter than everyone else. My grammar is better than everyone, right? Do you just look down on people and you just start to elevate yourself up? Because that's pride. Pride's about elevating ourselves and pushing other people down. Maybe pride looks like this for you. Talking about yourself nonstop. Do you have coffee, lunch with someone, and all of a sudden you get done and you've asked them nothing? The entire conversation is you talking, you sharing, you pouring out, you dominate the whole conversation, and you don't stop ever to actually ask them. You don't reverse engineer the whole conversation instead of out of the hour coffee. Instead of 50 minutes of you talking and 10 minutes of them talking, you start to go, I need to be quiet for 50 minutes. I need to start asking them more questions because right now I realize it's my pride that I dominate the conversation because it's all about me. Again, pride is lifting ourselves up. Maybe it looks like this, choosing to be constantly critical. Are you critical of everyone and everything? No one can be good enough. You mask it with excellence. You mask it with greatness. You mask it with, hey, God calls us to give us our all. But in all reality, you're just being critical of everyone. You want to tear people down to build yourself up. Maybe it looks like this, seeking attention and affirmation. Do you want the spotlight on you all the time? And so you create scenarios where everyone looks at you. You create scenarios where the spotlight comes on you. You want the praise. We all need encouragement. I'm not talking about that. But you know if this is you, right? You want the spotlight on you, and you create relational circles where the spotlight is all on you. Maybe it looks like this, unwilling to receive constructive criticism. Do you allow people to give you healthy, life-giving, encouraging, loving criticism in your life to help you get better? Or do you just tune everyone out? Or when someone tries to, you just throw up a wall. It's pride. Maybe pride looks like this, justifying sin instead of admitting it. You can justify and rationalize and dismiss every sin, but still sin. And pride wants you to do that. And pride, last one, allowing fear to thrive. Allowing fear to thrive. We've circled around this word uncertainty. Global uncertainty, uncertainty within the United States, uncertainty with our lives. And what we looked at last week is that fear is the emotion pushing behind it. And the only remedy, the only thing to shove fear and keep fear in this place is faith. But what we have to realize, behind fear is pride. It's just pride. It is in the shadows, causing us to be fearful. And the only remedy to pride is humility. It's to lower ourselves. You see, I think about King Nebuchadnezzar. He teaches this as he tells his story and he models this. You see, it's about lowering ourselves. It's humility. And in the same action, it's lifting your eyes. Think about Nebuchadnezzar. He goes, and I lifted my eyes. I raised my eyes to God in heaven. My encouragement for you, for me, let's call out the pride in our lives. The pride that's driving the fear into uncertainty. The pride that is creating relational havoc and brokenness in our lives. The pride that is, elevating ourselves above God. And let's lower ourselves, let's humble ourselves and lift our eyes up to God and say, God, you are sovereign. You're over all, you're in all. And God, I just want to follow you. This week, my encouragement for you, call out the pride in your life. Bring it into light. Shine a spotlight on it. Invite people in. Relook at that list. Start identifying other areas where pride is, again, creating havoc in your life. And lower yourself, humble yourself, and lift your eyes to God. And when you do that, watch faith grow, faith expand. How do we deal with uncertainty in our world? Unwavering faith. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the encouragement through two stories to teach us, to guide us, to give us insights. Lord, may we just focus on the pride in our lives that we all have. May we mine it up. May we shine a spotlight on it, knowing that your grace is sufficient to cover that. And Lord, I pray that you'll give us the strength to work through it, to humble ourselves, to lower ourselves, and to lift our eyes and focus on you. In your name I pray. Amen.